Russia has vetoed all votes at the United Nations on Ukraine, but there are three other members of the G20 who have abstained on all the resolutions, and one of them is India. So they have very much sat on the fence.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has offered Rishi Sunak a long hug as he welcomed the UK leader to the G20 Summit in Delhi this morning. Mr. Sunak says he'll hold a bilateral meeting with the Indian leader and will raise the issue of Russian aggression, urging him to call out Vladimir Putin. India is yet to condemn the invasion of Ukraine. Sir Mark Lyall Grant is the former National Security Advisor and former permanent representative of the UK to the United Nations. Sir Mark, good morning to you.
Good morning, Callum.
First of all, then, let's discuss, I suppose, the relationship between Rishi Sunak and Narendra Modi. A long hug to welcome our Prime Minister to India. Do they have a good foundation on which to launch into this summit?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it is a completely unprecedented situation. Rishi Sunak is described in India as India's son-in-law because of his wife and her father, who's a very well-known figure in India. So I think there is obviously a special bond potentially between the two men. Now that doesn't translate directly into, for instance, getting an easy and quick trade agreement between the United Kingdom and India. It doesn't work like that. Personalities make a difference, but there are various structural problems which prevent an early agreement on a trade deal between the two countries.
Yeah, indeed. And Rishi Sunak's been managing expectations on the trade deal, saying it's not a given. He says it would be good to have, but he's not going to rush it. Is that expectation management, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's not forget that this is a G20 meeting. So the bilateral that he is going to have with Narendra Modi later today is just one of 15 or 20 that Modi himself will be having. So it'll only be a sort of a 20-minute, 30-minute meeting. So one wouldn't expect there to be the sort of detailed discussion of a trade agreement at that meeting. So I think he's correctly managing expectations. But the main blockage in a trade agreement is the same one that's been for the last 5 to 10 years, and that is the question of visas. Clearly, the Indians want more visas for students and more visas for workers for Indians to come to the UK. Rishi Sunak will want to be pretty cautious on that front, given the domestic politics in this country.
Yeah, of course, and that's always the backdrop with deals such as this. What do you make of the absences from the G20? We'll come on to the Ukraine situation in a mo, but I just want to consider first of all that Xi Jinping, president of China, is going to miss the G20. What is lost by President Xi not being there?
Yes, I think the two big absences obviously are President Putin and President Xi. I mean, President Putin's understandable. He ducked the BRICS summit in South Africa a couple of months ago because he's worried about the arrest warrant out against him issued by the International Criminal Court. President Xi is more interesting because he did go to the BRICS summit in South Africa, but is not going to this in Delhi, and that's being seen in India as something of a snub. For the set piece event for India's year. And I think that reflects not really solidarity with Putin, but more the fact that there's a lot of tensions between China and India at the moment. And I don't think Xi wants to expose himself to that. He also doesn't want to boost India's sort of credentials in the region at a time when China itself is suffering somewhat economically.
So that does bring us on to discuss the situation in Ukraine. And I suppose Prime Minister Sunak's approach to this when addressing it with Narendra Modi, I think it's fair to say that India's been a bit equivocal over the war in Ukraine, isn't it? So this is high on the PM's agenda. What does a win look like for Rishi Sunak when it comes to the war in Ukraine and discussions with Modi?
No, you're absolutely right. Of course, Russia has vetoed all votes at the United Nations on Ukraine, but there are three other members of the G20 who have abstained on all the resolutions, and one of them is India. So they have very much sat on the fence. They have increased their trade, particularly oil and gas trade with Russia as a result of sanctions against Russia. So they do not want to be drawn into any condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I think Rishi Sunak will want to persuade Narendra Modi that he cannot continue to sit on the fence and aspire to play a global role that India wants to do. The more immediate problem is to agree a communique, because the draft communique that officials have now put to their bosses in Delhi has a big blank in it where the paragraph on Ukraine would normally go. Now, this, in the foreign ministers' meeting earlier this year, also hosted by India, they didn't agree a communique at all because of disagreements on Ukraine. So I think certainly Rishi Sunak will want to persuade Modi not to duck this issue in any communique. And if Russia wants to dissent itself from the consensus, from the majority view, then that can be reflected in the communique. But not to mention Ukraine when there's a full-scale war going on in Europe would be a loss, and I think a damaging outcome for all the Western members of the G20.
That's very interesting what you say there, Sir Mark, about India's ambition. It's I suppose, and the recognition of India as a real key global player already, but with that evolving and progressing further. Does a situation like equivocating over Ukraine or not saying anything at all on it, does that hold India back, and to what extent does it hold India back from achieving that status?
I think it does. I mean, it's interestingly throughout my career, I would say that the three most sort of unilateral countries in the world are the United States, Russia, and India. India, until very recently, had a smaller foreign service than New Zealand. They have not been global players, they've been regional players. But now that they have become a global economic power, they need to catch up and to play a role on the international scene, which they have traditionally never done. So this is quite a shift in the mentality and thinking in Delhi. And I think Modi hasn't quite got his mind around that yet. And this is something I'm sure that Rishi Sunak will be exploring with him.
And is Sunak the man to tempt him into that, do you think, to coax that next step out of Modi?
Well, he won't be the only Western leader taking that line, but nonetheless, as I say, because of the special relationship perhaps between them, because of the unique history of his own family, there is the possibility that he can have some influence with Modi, perhaps some other European leaders wouldn't have.
Sir Mark, Lyall Grant, really, really good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.